What up, Racer? ItsJerone here, and before we get into the video, I first of all want to say that this is officially 1 year that this channel has existed, and it's been exactly 1 year since I started league racing, so clearly I'm still enjoying it, which is a good thing. And yeah, today I'm bringing you another Apex Online Racing League Racing video. I think this is round 7 or 8, I'm not entirely sure, but we're here around France and looking to get a good result today because, well, last 2 races I didn't win and I really want another win again. Now for this race I actually did quite a bit of practice, did about 2.5 practice race with quite a bit of time trial as well, so I think we're prepared pretty well for today. And as you can see, it's actually the 8th round of the season and we're currently leading by 54 points to Gweeks and a little more to my teammates.
To see some rain about 10 to 15 minutes from
and
now.
As you can hear there's rain expected towards the end of qualifying, so that means we'll have to get our laps in relatively early. And my first run on the soft compound tire, it's good enough for a P2, only 300ths away from Pasty, but to be fair, it's not one of my best times ever, 29.2. I've done 0.0s as a banker, and you could possibly do, like, well, if you're really good, then of course you can do like 0.5 as a banker probably, but I possibly could do a 0.8 as a banker. But you can see here, Pasty currently on provisional pole position, Pedro in 3rd, Weeks 4th, and my teammate in P9, still on set of mediums. Now, we're skipping on to the end of qualifying. As you can see, we still have 2.5 minutes on the clock, and that means we went out relatively early in order to cope with hopefully no rain during this qualifying lap. And this will be the final lap of qualifying. So here we go, heading into turn 1. Not really optimizing the track on the right hand side, but it is a relatively good run through turns 1 and 2. Also didn't optimize the exit on turn 2 really, but you can see now optimizing the track completely here. That was pretty good, but then here it's still relatively good. On the power, not as early as I possibly could have been, but still I think it's a relatively okay first sector after all, and we're about a 10th up on our delta, so this should be enough for pole position at the moment. But then braking for this chicane in the middle of the Mistral straight, bit too late and missed that first apex, so definitely not a good chicane here. Still gained a little bit of time actually, but it really was not a good chicane. And we're heading now towards the end of the Mistral straight. Pedro out of the session, and you can see it started raining a little bit here as we're going through this fast right-hander. I was still saying to myself, just act as if there's no rain and just completely send it. And you can see now, getting on the traction, it's getting a little bit moisty and we don't get the traction we were aiming to find. Then going through this left-hander, we can't get the car rotated anymore, and actually the final corner running way too deep here, and basically all the time we had gained on the, well, before the end of the Mistral straight, it's essentially gone now. We do improve by 42 thousandths of a second, but the rain towards the end of the lap definitely messed up the lap and I couldn't get the pole position anymore, so bit of shame. Pasty went out earlier, he improved, so well done by him. P2 is still a good place to fight from though, and my team has improved to P5 on the grid. Pedro in 3rd, Gweeks in 4th, all relatively close to each other. So for the race we will have dry conditions, no wet weather to cope with, so I think that's a good thing. I practiced quite a lot in dry conditions, so I know what to expect. You can see my setup here, running 710 wings today. Quite an interesting suspension, and tire wear or tire pressures nearly all the way to the max, because you do want essentially to have as little tire wear as possible, because you can make a soft to medium work, but you also don't want too high pressures because it can overheat your tires. But 5 red lights are on and we're underway for the French Grand Prix here in Paul Ricard. And after a slow initial phase of the line, we have a very good second phase. Are we going to go around the outside of Pasty? The answer is no, and we have to slot in behind as we now actually have the Ferrari of Pedro really close behind us. He's looking for a move into turn 3, and we've just about been forced off track here, and we're still side by side now heading into turn 5, but I decided to let Pedro go there and not rejoin dangerously. Now it's actually Gweeks down our inside, which now becomes the outside, and he decides to back out there. But you can see now my teammate Ralph really close behind Gweeks as well. We have to keep on our battery down the Mistral Straight and braking for the chicane, leaving space on the inside for a car. I actually at the time thought it was Gweeks, but it was actually my teammate getting the move done for P4. So my teammate with a good start as usual, and we dropped from position. Fair play to Pedro. I think he actually did leave just about a car's width of space, but I just decided to take the safer option and run off track a little bit, as I really did not want to get any damage. But this does mean that Pasty in his McLaren has managed to pull a 2-second gap to me and a 1.5 gap to Pedro, which we'll have to close up in the following laps in order to not lose DRS and let him get away. So you can see now actually behind me my teammate messed up that final corner, and Gweeks went around the outside, I think, down the inside, I have no idea, but Gweeks managed to get his P4 back, and we have another look at the replay of the start. You can see I didn't really carry much momentum through turns 1 and 2, and yeah, didn't have the greatest of exits, which meant Pedro could go down my inside. He had quite a shallow line and actually ran a little bit wide, but fair enough, I think there was just about one car's width of space, so we survive and we can still fight from this 3rd position we have in the race right now. And you can see there, Gweeks didn't want to hang it around the outside. Probably a smart decision. Then skipping on to lap number 2 now, and Pasty is still exactly 2 seconds down the road, as we already get our first warning for track limits, which is not a good sign. During my practice races, the best I've done is 7 warnings, I think. But usually in the actual race, I drive just a little bit slower and pick up no warnings. Or no warnings, no penalties at least. So that's a good thing. But having a warning from lap 2 already, that's not a good sign. Because this race is pretty long, and there are plenty of opportunities to invalidate your lap and pick up a warning. So, and meanwhile we're looking at Pedro closing the gap to Pasty a little bit, but I think actually on the start of this lap he did mess up a little bit. In the meanwhile, we've just been sitting behind him because his pace was pretty okay, but we're not really closing in on Pasty, and I'm basically on a full battery right now. So lap 5, I decided to go for a move on Pedro here. This should not be too difficult, and actually Pedro decides to not make it too difficult indeed. So we blaze past him on the straight and we get back onto the racing line before the chicane, and we're now 1.3 seconds behind Pasty. And from what I could see already, Pasty was not running a lowdown for setup at all. In fact, I think he was running even higher wings than I was. So we're gaining a little bit down this straight as we bring down the gap to 1.1 seconds. And it looks like if me and Pedro cooperate a little bit more, we will be able to close this gap. Actually, going through this left-hander here, Pasty running relatively wide, and then going through the penultimate corner here, you can see, at first I was thought Pasty was actually going into the pit lane for a set of hards, but he actually just ran extremely wide there, probably heating up his tires in the process, and we managed to get DRS. So here we are, 2 laps later, and we're halfway through lap 7, as we're now getting on the power out of the chicane. But where's the Ferrari? Pedro did not manage to keep it on track, and unfortunately for Pedro, this just happens a bit too often to him. He's really quite strong in qualifying pace and race pace usually as well, but he always seems to make that 1 or 2 mistakes in a race, which just completely screw him up. So bit of a shame to see that happen to him. He was doing a pretty good race so far, but you can see now we do have a 1.2 second gap to my teammate, and you can also see the McLaren of Pasty coming into the pit lane, so probably going on to a set of hards, because it's definitely too early to go for a set of mediums. To go onto mediums you really need to make lap 8, but ideally you want to make lap 9. before you get onto a set of mediums. So you can see now we do manage to pull away, and meanwhile behind, Gweek's going for a move on my teammate, but there are yellow flags, and it seems there's been an incident between my teammate and Gweek's, and we will cut onto that incident now. So you can see what happens here. My teammate is really pushing, I think actually picking up a warning there, or maybe just about not a warning. It was really close at least. But you can see here, Gweek's using a lot of his ERS, and I think expecting my teammate to let him go here. But my teammate actually decides to fight it, but then Gweek's actually spins on the inside curb. And fortunately for Gweek's, it's no damage, but my teammate does pick up damage from this move. And then there's Gweek's teammate Crow going down the inside. As actually Crow, Ralph, no mercy, all decide to pit at the end of lap 8. Gweek's deciding to continue with me, going on to lap 9. Now my tire wear in this race was actually extremely good. During my practice runs I would always be on about, well, 65 to 67% tire wear at the end of the first stint. But you'll see in a couple of moments as we go into the pit lane now, my tire wear was actually only 60% by the end of the stint. So I think I had a really strong first stint, could really push towards the end of the stint. Still doing low 34s, which is pretty good. And let's see now how much time we will lose to Pasty doing his undercut. I actually mess up my, well, it's not pit exit, but the pit box exit, let's say, as I'm not sure what it is, but definitely lost a couple of tenths there. And let's see now, where will Pasty emerge as we now drop down to P6, actually drop down to P7, because Pasty is only right in front of us, so doing that undercut by 2 laps didn't really gain him anything. And to be fair, I was a little bit baffled here, because the delta between old softs and new mediums is about 1.3, 1.4 seconds at this point, and to hards is probably about 0.8, 0.7 seconds. So Pasty definitely should have pulled away more than this, and we actually pick up DRS down the Mistral straight already. So it's looking pretty good for us, especially considering that Gweek's is now lost a bit of time, and my teammate had front wing damage and had to pit. So essentially it's now a 1v1 for the win of this race, and you can see now I decided to play aggressive here, not waste any time, and we're immediately going for it, keeping our ERS on. Are we going to go down the inside? Yes, we are, leaving each other space, and we do manage to get the move done for the net lead of this race. A really sweet move down the inside of Pasty there. Great respect between the pair of us, and immediately after there's a safety car. So for once in my life, actually, by playing aggressive and being a bit lucky that a safety car comes out right after I managed to get the overtake done. Now skipping on a little bit, Bankai staying out. He's probably hoping for another safety car at this point. Then there's Pasty in P3, but then you can see P4 Sneaky, P5 Stratus, they actually still had to pit, and due to, well, on their safety car you lose less time making a pit stop, and they actually managed to jump a couple of places, a lot of places, and they're now ahead of Gweek's, who's down in P6 or P7. I think P7 actually, because Crow's in P6. Stratus and Sneaky doing a really good job, although Sneaky actually did pick up a 5-second time penalty for speeding into the pit lane. But you can see now, my tires are really cold, and Bankai decides to pull the pin relatively early. But you can also see now the difference between mediums and hards. My mediums were immediately biting into the asphalt, gripping up really nicely, even though they were still really cold, and we already have a full second to Pasty. Now, my strategy before the safety car was to pull away from Pasty and hopefully create enough of a gap that towards the end of the race Pasty wouldn't be able to close up. And essentially my strategy is still the same, but we do have a car, an Alpine of Bankai in front of us still. Now, unfortunately for Cronexus, he picked up a drive-through penalty under safety car conditions, so really unfortunate for him, as he was in a really good position to possibly get a podium actually. But he had to serve that drive-through penalty, and he's now essentially out of this race, unless another safety car comes out, of course. In the meanwhile, we're looking at Sector 1 here at Paul Ricard, and decided to stay behind Bankai for the first lap, and now we managed to close up through Sector 1 a lot, and we're close enough behind him to go for a move. So we're going to keep our battery on, and I think Bankai is actually doing the same, possibly also running a lower downforce setup, and I just about managed to pull alongside before the chicane, and Bankai decides not to fight too hard, which, to be honest, I was pleasantly surprised with, because I thought he would try to fight his position as hard as possible while spraying for another safety car. But actually, that was not a strategy. He was actually intending on doing a hard medium. Not sure why he didn't pit under safety car. Really strange decision. But you can see now, a lap later, we managed to pull a second and a half on Bankai, and Pasti is now 2 seconds behind, but he will get this move done. Actually, not down this straight, he will get the move done down the next straight. But this is really good news for us, since we already have more than a second gap to Pasti. And at this point I thought, well, I have 60% battery now. I'm just going to manage my battery until the end of the race, and essentially just drive my own time trial here, and hopefully I can create enough of a gap these next couple of laps such that Pasti won't be able to close up that gap towards the end of the race. You can see now we're on to lap 22, so we skipped quite a couple of laps, and Weeks did manage to overtake Stratus and Sneaky, and he's now actually going for a move on Pasti as well. And we do have a 3-second gap at the moment, so we're looking pretty comfortable, still on 1 warning, and it's looking good for us to win this race. And you can see now we're skipping on to lap number 26. The gap is still more than 3 seconds, as I think Weeks and Pasti were more concerned with each other than concerned about trying to catch up to me at this point. So they're probably saving up their batteries, as we actually pick up a second warning there. But as you can see now, we have more than 4 seconds starting the final lap of the race. Now, I wanted to go for a fastest lap as well, or at least an attempt for fastest lap, but I didn't really get good exits out of turns 1 and 2 for the previous 2 laps. So I just decided to save the battery, and on this final lap we're going to absolutely send it and deploy all the battery we have. Considering the fastest lap point in this league is rewarded to the quickest driver in the top 10, I thought I would just go for it, but now yellow flags behind, and Pasti actually went for a move on Weeks into, what's that, turn 6 probably, and he's been spun round. You can see now he's dropping all the way down the order behind Sneaky, Stratus and Phantom Dragon. And yeah, we'll cut into that incident after we cross the start finish line. We're going to stay on board for my final lap of the race here. You can see down to 10% battery, using up the final bit, heading into this fast right-hander. And of course I was still pushing, but I was pushing in a controlled manner, as I really didn't want to spin now, of course. And you can see now going through this left-hander, we're up on our delta by more than half a second at this point. Then going through the penultimate corner, down to 3rd gear, because at this point the tires are starting to give up a little bit. Also the 60% tire wear icon has popped up, but more importantly, we're back to winning form, and we also do improve our lap time significantly. But let's see in a couple of moments whether that's good enough for an extra point in this race. You can see now Weeks is on board, and Pasti sending it down the inside here, and Weeks doing a little bit of a double turning. I think he tried to leave space, but he was really not expecting Weeks or Pasti to go down the inside there. I think he was just expecting Pasti to wait for the DRS straight and essentially fight down the Mistral straight and see who would come out on top. So, to be honest, it was a very aggressive move by Pasti. I think he tried to force Weeks offline, maybe, to try to force Weeks to have a poor exit down the Mistral straight. But yeah, if I were Pasti, I wouldn't take such a risk, and I think possibly also Weeks could have done a bit more to avoid him. As far as I can see now, no stewards inquiry has been put up yet, so I don't think Pasti is actually trying to challenge this, as he dropped down all the way to P6. But you can see Stratus doing a really good job on that alternative strategy, picking up a podium. Sneaky get very decent P4, I would say. My teammate had a shocker of a race also after the safety car. Things just went wrong. For my race, did really good, managed to race pretty well, and actually I did pick up the fastest lap in the top 10, so we're getting an additional point, and I'm very pleased with this race. The next race is Silverstone. If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like is also appreciated, and I'll see you for the next race. Bye bye.